My brother Dan was an extremely awkward person. He was 28 and he'd never even kissed a girl before. Aside from his weight problem, he wasn't that unattractive, but he had deep anxiety and barely left the house. He worked from home doing IT stuff, so he could spend weeks at a time not seeing another human. I tried to visit him at least once a month because I knew he didn't really have any friends to talk to. We usually just played video games and ate pizza together. We didn't talk a lot, but when we did, it was usually about my life. If I tried to ask him anything about himself, he just said things like, "Nothing's new," or same old, same old. I honestly felt sorry for him. I could tell he was lonely. Then, one day, I came to visit, and everything was different. He'd cleaned up his entire apartment. All his dirty clothes and fast food wrappers were off the floor. The room even smelled nicer. He was wearing a clean shirt, and he'd actually gotten a haircut. I cannot tell you how surprised I was. "Dan," I said, "what happened?" He smiled and said, "I'm engaged." I was speechless. How could he possibly have met someone? He told me that his fiancée was named Nadia. He showed me her picture, and right away I felt sick to my stomach. Nadia was gorgeous. She looked like a supermodel. My brother was definitely being catfished. I tried to be really diplomatic. I said that she was pretty, and I asked him where they'd met. He said that they hadn't actually met yet. Nadia was still in Moldova, but she'd be coming to America next week. He explained that he started browsing through the dark web and had found a company that matched single Americans with women from Eastern Europe. Basically, my brother had gotten a mail-order bride. "How much did you pay?" I asked. "Just 30 bitcoins, he said. I was relieved, because I figured that if he sent money through the dark web, it would be gone forever. At least it wasn't a lot. I asked him how much that was in dollars, but he wouldn't answer. I had to pressure him into admitting that 30 bitcoins is about $800,000. I felt physically sick to my stomach. I tried to convince him to cancel the order. I explained that he was getting scammed out of his money. And even if he wasn't, this mail-order bride thing was illegal and immoral. I'd never seen my brother get so mad. He told me that I wanted him to stay alone forever. He said that I was just jealous, that I didn't want him to be happy. He ordered me to leave. After that, I kept calling him to see if he was okay. He never answered. I was so worried about him. Then, a week later, I couldn't handle it anymore. I went back to his house to check on him. I even practiced what I was going to say beforehand. I had to make sure that I could get through to him without sending him into another rage. I knocked on his door, and Nadia answered. She was even more beautiful in person. She was tall and thin, and she had dark, angry eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked. I introduced myself and asked if my brother was home. "He doesn't want to see you," she said, and slammed the door in my face. I kept knocking, but she didn't answer. After that, I called all our relatives to ask for help. I had no idea what to do. I didn't know if Dan was in trouble, but I had a terrible feeling in my stomach that something wasn't right. Everyone told me that I shouldn't worry. One of my cousins even said the same thing Dan told me, that I was acting jealous. But I wasn't jealous. I was just scared that Dan had made the wrong choice. Months passed, and Dan still wouldn't answer my calls or texts. I had to go back there in person. Once again, I knocked on the front door, and Nadia answered. She recognized me right away and tried to close the door, but I stopped her with my foot. "Please," I said, "I need to see my brother." "He doesn't want to see you," she said. I could hear Dan in the other room. Obviously, he knew I was there. "Dan," I shouted into the apartment, "please let me in." "No," he shouted from the kitchen. "Just let me see that you're okay," I said. "Fine," he shouted. Nadia reluctantly opened the door just wide enough for me to look into the apartment. The place was still spotless, though a lot of the decorations on the walls were different. All his sci-fi posters were replaced by landscape paintings. It was nice, but it didn't look like Dan's style at all. Dan stepped into the living room. He was too far away for me to see him closely, but I recognized his face. He looked amazing. In the months since I'd last seen him, he'd lost a ton of weight. His body was lean and muscular. Even his complexion had cleared up. I'd never seen Dan look so good. Maybe Nadia was a good influence on him after all. "Wow," I said. "You look great. Please, can I come in?" He shook his head. Nadia kicked my foot out of the way and slammed the door shut. I had such mixed feelings. On the one hand, I knew that Dan was healthy. He looked healthier than ever. But on the other hand, his new fiancée was keeping me out of his life. I wanted to think that he was happy, but I couldn't be sure. For the next few weeks, that was all I could think about. I needed to find out a way to get Dan alone, to talk to him without Nadia nearby. If I could just get him to tell me he was okay, then I'd stop worrying. So I went to his apartment and parked across the street. I waited in my car for hours, until finally I saw Dan leave the apartment to take out the trash. He still looked thin and muscular. He was dressed in expensive clothes with cool, dark sunglasses. This was my chance. I ran out of the car and shouted his name. "Dan! Dan!" He looked at me for a second, and then raced back toward the apartment. I chased after him and grabbed him by the back of his clothes before he could get back inside. "Get off me!" he shouted. But it wasn't Dan's voice. He sounded deeper, and it had a Russian accent. I pulled the sunglasses off his face and took a good long look at him. This man wasn't my brother at all. He looked a bit like him, but up close I could tell that he wasn't the real Dan. I could even see very faint scars along his jawline, signs of some kind of plastic surgery. This man had gotten surgery to look like Dan. He was living Dan's life in America, but he was an imposter. He punched me right in the face. He spun around to rush back inside, but I couldn't let him get away. I ran after him and shoved him to the ground. "Where's Dan?" I asked. "I am Dan," he said in his accent. Nadia walked out of the other room. "What is going on?" she asked. As soon as she saw me, she screamed. She ran toward me, too. For a second, I thought they were both going to attack me, but instead, she grabbed fake Dan by the arm, shouting something to him in another language. Then, they both raced out of the apartment. I looked around Dan's apartment. I still didn't understand what was happening. I looked through the living room, and the bedroom, and the kitchen. There were no signs of my real brother. Then, I noticed that the kitchen had a new freezer in the corner. I pulled it open and saw Dan frozen inside. He was obviously dead. I called the police to report a murder, and then I completely broke down. I felt terrible that it had taken me so long to find out the truth. It's been months now, and I have no idea where Nadia and her imposter boyfriend went. I know they're still out there, and I worry that they'll do this all again. Find a lonely person and take over his life. My 22-year-old son, Jimmy, still lived at home. He worked on his computer all day doing some kind of IT job that I couldn't understand. That was all well and good, but I was worried that he spent too much time online. He never went out. I could hear him talking to people in his room, but it was always through his little microphone. I can't even remember the last time I met one of his friends in real life. Still, he made good money, and I knew that he loved what he did. His father and I mostly left him alone. Most days, we'd only see him when he came downstairs for lunch or dinner. We tried to encourage him to go outside and try to meet people, but he always told us that he was happy. Then, one day, a huge box arrived on our front porch. It was the size of a refrigerator, and it was addressed to Jimmy. I went up to his room and told him that his package had arrived. He screamed at me through his door. "You didn't open it, did you?" He sounded really panicked. Of course not," I said. "Good." And then he went downstairs, and the two of us carried the box into his room. I tried to ask him what it was, but he just said that it was something he'd ordered. I had a really strange feeling about it, but I didn't want him to get mad. Over the next few days, more packages arrived. They were all of different sizes, all addressed to Jimmy. Each one was pretty heavy, so I always helped him carry them up to his room. I knew he wouldn't tell me what they were, so I tried to ask him other questions. I wanted to get any information I could. I asked him if he'd ordered from Amazon, but he said no. He said that he was using a marketplace on the dark web. I had no idea what the dark web was, but it didn't sound good. It sounded illegal. After the 5th or 6th box arrived, Jimmy said that he'd gotten everything he needed. After that, he just stayed up in his room. He didn't even come down to eat dinner with us anymore. In the night, I could hear him go downstairs to fix himself food from the fridge. It was like he was purposely avoiding us. I started to worry that he was doing something really bad with whatever was in those boxes. Maybe he was building a bomb or something. I tried to talk to my husband about this, but he didn't seem to be worried. He just told me that Jimmy was his own man, whatever that meant. A week went by, and I couldn't stand the uncertainty anymore. I sat awake in bed, unable to sleep. And when I heard Jimmy sneak downstairs to make his food, I decided to go into his room to see once and for all what was in those boxes. I quietly walked down the hall and into his bedroom. I didn't want to turn on the light, so I used the flashlight on my phone to look around.
Hello, Jimmy. You're back already?
A woman's voice asked. I gasped. There was a woman in here. I shined the light into the corner of the room and saw the most horrifying thing I'd ever seen. A woman sat on a tiny stool, but she wasn't human. She was some sort of robot, and her face looked like one of those Japanese cartoons that Jimmy used to watch when he was a kid. Jimmy had ordered a robot from the dark web. For what? Companionship? Sex? I felt like throwing up.
What's wrong, Jimmy?
The woman asked me. I guess she couldn't tell the difference between me and my son. What are you? I asked her.
I don't understand, she said. Ask your question again, please.
The light clicked on. What are you doing? Jimmy screamed. He stood in the doorway, furious. I'd been caught. I had to explain myself. I was just worried about you. I worried that you had something dangerous in here. She's not dangerous, he screamed. I love her.
Honey, let's go downstairs and talk about this, okay?
Whatever you want to say to me, he said. You can say it in front of Rinko.
Are you okay, Jimmy? The robot woman asked. Your voice is loud.
By that point, the commotion had woken up my husband, Daniel. He walked into the room, rubbing the sleep out of his eyes, and asked what was going on. It took him a few seconds to see the robot woman. Jesus, he shouted. Don't talk to Rinko like that, Jimmy shouted. My husband is a very calm and reasonable man, but when he disagrees with something, he will fight anyone who gets in his way. He pushed past Jimmy and charged toward the woman. This is wrong, he shouted. I will not allow this thing in my house. The robot had wires connecting the back of her head to some kind of computer box on the floor. He started pulling them out, trying to shut her down. Jimmy literally jumped on his father's back, trying to pull him away. But Jimmy wasn't very strong, so Daniel just shook him loose. Jimmy fell onto the floor, watching with horror as his father tried to shut down the robot. From the ground, Jimmy looked up and shouted, Rinko, defend yourself! The robot woman blinked once, and then she raised both of her arms. She struck Daniel on either side of the head. It didn't seem like she hit him hard, but he instantly collapsed onto the floor, unconscious. I needed to get help fast. I called the police and told them to send an ambulance here as soon as possible. I said my husband was hurt. I didn't mention any more specifics because they might have thought it was a prank call. Jimmy glared at me and ordered me to take his father out of the room. Of course I wasn't going to do that. He just had a head injury. There was no way I'd try to move his body and cause any more damage. I told him that we'd just wait here until the ambulance arrived. No, Jimmy said, no one else can see her. He raced over to the robot and unplugged her. Then he carried her stiff body to his closet and hid her inside. Very soon after that, the paramedics arrived to take Daniel to the hospital. A policeman came in and asked us how Daniel had gotten hurt. I started to answer, but then Jimmy said that he'd hit his father. He took responsibility, and the cop asked him to come down to the station and give a statement. As they left, Jimmy told me, "Do not touch anything." When they were both gone, I went into his closet and pulled out that terrible robot woman. I carried her downstairs and into the backyard, where I buried her behind our shed. Now, Daniel had a concussion, but he's recovering nicely. Jimmy was not charged with anything, so he's back home now. He keeps demanding to know where I took Rinko, but I won't tell him. I'm worried that he'll just order another one, but if he does, I'm finally going to kick him out of the house. I can't live with something like that under my roof.
I stared at the work of art in fascination, utter disbelief even, that such skill was possible. My tongue clung to the roof of my mouth, and my face was pale in admiration of the detail that was on the screen before me. I was spun and staggered at the intricate detail that went into making this new art. My eyes scoured the structure and the setup. It was not another caricature or characterless attempt at fine art. It was simply brilliant. Good God, I muttered at the eyes of the painting. I was hypnotized by the strength in it. In my mind, it possessed the spirit of the artist itself, Daniel Orban. I swallowed with some nervous difficulty when I reconciled that I had invited him to my home, which was not much, but he had been friendly with the thought of it. The characters in his painting all had poses that only an imaginative mind could have assumed, contorted at precise areas that made it difficult to tell how different it was from the real deal. My spirit yearned for his presence, for the fulfillment that having such a great man with me could provide. I knew better than to throw away such an opportunity. I blew air through the roof of my mouth. "Hey, stop for a cigarette. A few minutes away. We'll be there shortly." His message sent my heart into a delighted flutter. We had not always been so cordial. The circumstances of our meeting did not allow it. We had met on the dark web. He was a very impressive artist from the moment I had stumbled upon his work on the regular web. I had held my breath at the sheer brilliance of it, and then the work was gone, disappeared from my trail with my phone refreshed before I could make a mental note of it. The memory of that moment had lingered in my head for hours, and it was relentless in my brain until I sent a message to the author of that posting. He had then directed me to Daniel Orban's directory. I found my way into the rabbit's hole, fueled by my curiosity. Daniel Orban's directory took me through a couple of channels until I was deep into the dark web, and far away from the surveillance of the regular web. This mystery added to my perception of him. When I clicked on the right button on my mouse on that occasion, I felt as though I was unraveling in the presence of his mystery. "Who are you? And why are you here?" I sniffed at the thought of that initial question. I had broken the ice of the question by narrating to him how alluring I had found his work to be, and how it was this magnetism that compelled me to find him. He did not seem impressed, so he asked me a few questions, some of which were personal. I answered all of it as honestly as I could, and then the questions stopped. Daniel Orban told me that he left the regular web with his work because he did not trust the world with what he was creating. I suggested he had spoken the truth because his work was so good. He hinted that he had found humor in it. I questioned him about his technique. He said it was unconventional being emphasized, as though I would think of him less as an artist if he did not attach some aura to himself. He asked me where I lived and for a picture. I sent the picture first, and it was a picture of me in loose-fitting clothes. I hesitated to give him the address, but I did after a moment's pause. He said he would have a demonstration for me. I was delighted. A picture of me in Daniel Orban's collection would immortalize me forever, just as the character in Da Vinci's painting. Within a week, we were engaged in phone calls while maintaining our connection on the dark web. And it was on the dark web I was when the thought hit me after he had mentioned his stopover for cigarettes. A tender breeze of sorts blew the words into my ears. I tried to dismiss it as a betrayal of trust, but the nagging feeling did not cease. I snatched my cell phone from the desk and took a picture of the first portrait of a redhead girl staring out into the sunny window. I turned on the image search to see if he had found inspiration from anywhere. My phone took a second before it produced results, but when it did, it was nothing like I had expected. My brows arched. Something was wrong. "Hey, done smoking. 3 minutes max." I swiped his message off the top of my screen. My heart began to race as I read the information which occupied the screen. Just as I had guessed, the inspiration in the painting was a girl, but she was missing and had not been seen for over a year. I felt an uncomfortable lump in my throat. I closed the image from Daniel's art on my computer and opened another. I ran the same search on the image. Just like the former inspiration, it was of another girl who had a striking resemblance to the art piece, and she was missing too. The patterns were coming together rapidly in my head, and the thoughts started to unravel like a ball of yarn. In all, there were about 12 paintings of Daniel Orban's which he intended to present at a gallery when they were 13. I ran my simple investigation on one other art piece to confirm my suspicion. My blood ran cold at the information. I was certain. A car revving to a halt in front of my house snapped me out of my trance. I knew it was him. My fingers around my phone quivered violently from panic, and my phone almost dropped. I dialed the emergency lines and it connected at once. "Hello? Emergency." The receiver blared into my ear, assaulting my senses. "Hey, there was a man at my door." I rolled out my address. "He's here to kill me. I need you to help." I was breathless and pale from fright. "Hello, Lisa. It's Daniel," he said. I said nothing. "I know you were in there. I have location access to your device, and you were just active on my page. Open up." "I want you to leave," I blurted, busting into tears as fear crippled me to my knees. "You pieced it together, didn't you?" he muttered viciously. "Open this door now." I had nowhere to run to. My feet failed me, my body too. There was something in his voice. It was all happening so quickly that I felt my consciousness travel out of my body briefly. I opened the door. "Stay back," I said to Daniel. "Or what?" He grinned, his vaguely familiar face now carved into an angry feature that made him a stranger. He marched slowly towards me and I buried my head between my arms. "Say nothing. Just do as I say and you will be immortal," he said. The next couple of hours passed by in a rush. I was his muse and he was my Da Vinci. When he was done painting me, he pulled out a small bottle containing some liquid. He then asked me to drink it. Tears ran down my cheeks. In that moment, in that vulnerable state, I had no control over myself. Slowly, I took the bottle from his hands and was about to drink the liquid when the door burst open. "Stop! Police!" 2 hefty men raced up to us with their guns drawn and soon encircled him. As one of them pulled me to the side, "You called the cops, Lisa?" I nodded my head as tears streamed from my eyes. "Fuck you! You called the cops?" he hollered. "You are safe now," one of the cops said to me. "I am placing you under arrest, sir," the other said to him with handcuffs snapping both of his wrists together. I inhaled deeply in relief and thankfulness.